If you want to learn about how to use strength training for injury prevention, then this video is for you. Because in this presentation, we're going to cover a few different things. We're going to look at a meta-analysis that compares stretching, strength training, and proprioception to see which of those three reduces injuries the most. After that, we'll discuss and differentiate between the two major types of injuries, as well as 6 ways in which strength training addresses the risk of injury for both types of injuries. Then you learn about 2 caveats. So not everything that we think is strength training is actually strength training. For something to qualify to be called strength training, it has to have 2 specific criteria, which we're going to discuss in that section. And finally, we're going to discuss which exercises to do, because it's not quite as simple as here are the exercises. There are a few more considerations. Before we jump in, if you like this video and you like what we're going to talk about, click like and subscribe. It'll help you learn when I publish more videos similar to this. Now, a little bit about me. My name is Igor. I'm the author of 13 books on exercise and nutrition, including 4 Amazon bestsellers. As well, I've been a personal trainer since 2006. I train other personal trainers, and I've been presenting at personal training conferences since 2013. As well, I've done over 400 presentations to some of Canada's largest corporations, including IBM, Bosch, American Express, University of Toronto, Investors Group, and others. Now, here is the meta-analysis that I was talking about earlier. This is titled The Effectiveness of Exercise Interventions to Prevent Sports Injuries. And again, this is a systematic review and meta-analysis, which means that this is not a single study. This is a statistical review of many studied combined. So here is what they did. In this meta-analysis, researchers compared 3 different interventions, and they looked at their effectiveness in reducing risk of injury. So they compared stretching, different types of stretching, whether that's the sit and reach, as well as other methods of stretching, yoga, and so on. They compared that to strength training, as well as proprioception training. A different word for proprioception training is coordination training. So they would do different exercises without the goal of increasing their muscular strength or their muscular force, but just to be able to control their body better. And here were the results. Here was the risk of injury. So stretching reduced the risk of injury by only about 4%. So it was almost indistinguishable from not stretching. By comparison, proprioceptive training reduced the risk of injury by 45%, which makes sense. What is coordination? Coordination means you have a greater awareness of where your body is in space. And so if you have a greater awareness, you're able to bring it back from precarious positions. However, strength training reduced the risk of injury by 68%. So by far, the best return on your training investment was actually strength training. But we can't talk about all injuries under one umbrella. We really have to differentiate between 2 major types of injuries. And the 2 major categories are acute injuries, which is, for example, like an ankle sprain. 1 second you're fine, and the next second you aren't. It happens like that. And this is not due to overuse. This is just something that happens during your either daily life, activity, sport, etc. The other category of injuries is overuse. This is not something that happened suddenly. This is something that happened over a long time, many, many repetitions. Examples would be things like tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, and pretty much anything ending in itis. Plantar fasciitis, bursitis, tendinitis, these are all examples of overuse injuries. And strength training, fortunately, helps reduce both acute as well as chronic injuries. And so how does it work? What are the different mechanisms by which strength training reduces the risk of injury? Well, for acute injuries, the 3 mechanisms are 1, better coordination. So that's interesting that although there was direct training on coordination called proprioceptive training, strength training itself also has a proprioceptive effect. So it actually improves coordination. It also increases the failure threshold of the tissues. What does that mean? What is the failure threshold? The failure threshold is the point at which tissues fail. What do I mean by that? That means how much force can a muscle, a tendon, or a ligament take before before there is damage. For example, let's say you're trying to squat 300 pounds, but your max is 280. So there's a risk of injury because you're asking your body to lift 20 more pounds than you're capable. So of course, strength training raises that threshold so that lower, submaximal loads are not as taxing. And of course, there is a psychological readiness. You feel stronger, of course, if you're strength training. You feel more prepared. You feel like you have greater control of your body. as a result of strength training. So those are the three mechanisms by which strength training reduces acute injuries. Now, what about chronic injuries? There are three mechanisms there as well. First of all, chronic injuries, overuse injuries, happen because you do the exact same movement over and over and over again. So what strength training does is it gives you diversity in your movement patterns. So if you are playing tennis and you're doing forehands all the time, well, that uses the muscles of the pectorals, the chest, the shoulder, and to a lesser extent, the biceps and the forearm. Now, if you're still working those muscles, but in a strength training contest like a bench press or chin-ups, stuff like that, you're still working the same muscles, but with different movement patterns, and therefore you're stressing the tendons and ligaments in a different way than the original sport. Another mechanism by which strength training reduces the risk of chronic injury is by increasing the tolerance of the tissues. So let's say the most number of repetitions that you can do for any movement, whether that's forehands, backhands, or anything else, is 300. But you're not counting your repetitions and you do 310. If you do that once, it's not that big of a deal. But if you do that all the time, then you create tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, and any other kind of itis. So what strength training does is it increases the number of repetitions you can do before you start to get inflammation of the tendons or any other tissues. And similar to acute injuries, you also improve your coordination with strength training. Now, there are caveats. Not everything we think is strength training is actually strength training. In other words, it has to be true strength training. In other words, when I ask a lot of people, do you do strength training? They'll say, yes, I do body pump classes. Well, let me tell you, body pump classes are not strength training. Body pump classes are cardio with weights. I'm not saying it's bad for you. I'm not saying don't do it. I encourage cardio, but it does not have the benefits of strength training. So it really applies to true strength training. For strength training to be real, it has to be progressive. You can't be using the same weights, sets, repetitions over time. You have to progressively improve, because the way you improve your tolerance to greater loads, greater repetitions is with progression. You can't be doing the same thing day in and day out. Now, if you're wondering, that sounds great to me. How do I do it? What exactly should I do to reduce my risk of injury? Which exercises should I do? And unfortunately, it's not quite as simple as here are the exercises to do for injury reduction. It's a lot more complex than that. There are a number of factors to take into account. The two biggest factors are, one, what are your current activities? Are you doing some kind of sport? If so, are you competitive? Are you recreational? And if you're not doing a sport, what are your other daily activities? What are you doing repetitively? In other words, let's say somebody's a cashier, they're turning to one side repetitively. Let's say somebody is an office worker, their hand is on the mouse repetitively. So we have to take into account, what are your current repetitive activities? Where are you likely to get injured? Should we work every single muscle in the body with the same emphasis, or should we emphasize the muscles that are at higher risk of injury because of the daily activities? Of course, we should do primarily full body workouts, but with greater emphasis on the stuff that's likely to get injured. The second consideration is, have you had either overuse or acute injuries in the past? And the reason I ask that is because the greatest risk for future injury is past injury that wasn't properly rehabilitated. And so that's what we want to know in order to target the specific exercises for your body. Now, of course, this is way beyond the scope of this presentation, but if you do want something that's tailored directly to you, just fill out the application form on our homepage at www.fitnesssolutionsplus.ca, which is also linked in the description below. Check that out. If you like this video, click like and subscribe.